What if the biggest threat to Ukraine soldiers wasn't Russia, but their own president? As the war drags on into its fourth year, Volodymyr Zelenskyy has been celebrated in the West as a brave wartime leader. But behind the headlines and photo ops, cracks are showing. From broken promises on conscription to reckless military policies that cost tens of thousands of lives, Zelenskyy's leadership is coming under growing scrutiny. Truth about Ukraine's military strategy under Zelenskyy, a truth that his Western backers don't want you to hear. When Russia launched its full-scale invasion in 2022, Ukraine's military relied almost entirely on NATO partners for training. Over 1 lakh troops were trained abroad in Germany, Poland, the UK, and the United States. These programs gave Ukraine the edge it needed in artillery, drones, and urban warfare. But by 2025, something changed. Zelenskyy began pushing training back inside Ukraine. He proudly claimed in February that, quote, "We have built sufficient arrangements at home to train our defenders without unnecessary risks of deployment abroad." The problem? Training inside a war zone means troops are constantly exposed to Russian missile strikes. Reports confirm that Russian forces have repeatedly targeted training camps, forcing Ukraine to scatter soldiers in underground facilities or rush recruits straight to the front with minimal preparation. So, when critics say Zelenskyy is scrapping training, it's not completely true, but he has downgraded it. Soldiers now often get just a few weeks of rushed preparation before being sent into one of the deadliest conflicts of modern times. Instead of strengthening Ukraine, this reckless move has weakened its already strained forces. One of Zelenskyy's biggest political battles has been over conscription. Under martial law, men aged 18 to 60 are prohibited from leaving the country. In 2024, a law required every man in this bracket to register. Officially, the draft begins at age 25. But here's where the propaganda falls apart. Zelenskyy loves to tell the world that Ukraine doesn't draft teenagers and that claims about 14 or 16-year-old soldiers are Russian disinformation. Yet in 2025, Ukraine introduced the so-called special contracts for 18 to 24-year-olds, essentially insensitivized recruitment drives that look suspiciously like backdoor conscription. And what about seniors? A new law in July 2025 opened the door for over 60s to enlist in non-combat roles. Zelenskyy supporters say it's voluntary, but when your country is desperate for manpower, how voluntary is it really? In practice, both the very young and the very old are being pulled into the system that Zelenskyy swore would only rely on well-trained professionals. Even the United States pressured him to drop the draft age down to 18, a move he called morally unacceptable. Yet his new contracts quietly accomplish the same thing without admitting it. Zelenskyy talks about protecting his people. The reality? He's squeezing every last drop of manpower from society already broken by war. Perhaps the darkest shadow over Zelenskyy's presidency is the human cost. Let's be clear, no one doubts that this war is devastating, but how many Ukrainians have actually died? Official numbers from Kyiv are tightly controlled, but independent analysts paint a grim picture. 60,000 to 1 lakh Ukrainians killed, with total casualties killed and wounded around 4 lakh. That's nearly 500,000 people. And other unconfirmed sources claim Ukraine has already lost 1 million soldiers. Is that exaggerated? Probably. So why do these inflated numbers stick? Because Zelenskyy himself refuses transparency. Instead of confronting the reality, his speeches wrap losses in patriotic slogans, telling citizens that every life is irreplaceable, while continuing to push wave after wave of poorly trained soldiers onto the battlefield. To his critics, that's not leadership, it's a death sentence. Zelenskyy's defenders say he hasn't scrapped training, just adapted it. But adaptation has meant one thing: cutting the corners. After Russian strikes on training facilities in July 2025, Ukraine shifted recruits into smaller, scattered units. Some are trained in underground bunkers, others rushed into frontline battalions after only a few weeks of instruction. Worse still, in April 2024, Ukraine scrapped service time limits. Soldiers can now be held indefinitely on the front lines, rotating only when the commanders allow. The result? exhausted, demoralized troops with no certainty of ever going home. This isn't resilience, it's desperation. And every new reform Zelenskyy introduces only deepens the sense that he's more concerned with satisfying NATO sponsors than protecting Ukrainian lives. Publicly, Zelenskyy insists he cares for his people. He says, "We fight not just for our territory but for our people's future." But behind closed doors, his decisions tell a different story altogether. He allows rushed, unsafe training inside a war zone. He pushes new contracts that effectively draft Ukraine's youth. And he opens the door for senior citizens to be sent back into military service. He also refuses to release casualty numbers while asking the West for more aid. And all the while, he basks in the spotlight, appearing at international conferences, begging for weapons and promising the victory that never comes. To many Ukrainians, Zelenskyy isn't a savior. He's a showman sacrificing his own people to maintain Western support. As Ukraine bleeds, Zelenskyy continues to walk a dangerous line, balancing US pressure, European aid, and domestic exhaustion. But the facts speak for themselves. Training has been downgraded, conscription has quietly expanded, casualties are catastrophic, and Zelenskyy's rhetoric masks the suffering of ordinary Ukrainians. The myth of Zelenskyy as an untouchable wartime hero is collapsing, and as peace talks loom, one question grows louder. Will he keep sacrificing his nation's future for a war he cannot win? Because at the end of the day, leadership isn't about speeches, it is about lives. And under Zelenskyy, too many Ukrainian lives have already been lost. This is not the story you'll hear from the Western media, but it is the story that Ukrainians are living every single day. Thanks for watching.